Whatever it takes, right? I got that right there.
Okay, let's get started. My name is Jim McCloskey, and today we're doing the 4-hour mandatory class for 2016. So if that's what you came for, you're in the right place. And a lot of changes that happened over the last year, a lot of updates that we have to get through. So a lot of times this 4-hour course is an hour course, hour and a half long course. It's still not quite 4 hours, but there's a lot of information and a lot of good information in here. If you need to talk about anything, if you want to go off topic, let's do, that's fine. As far as the course goes, we're supposed to read it out of this book and not deviate it from it at all. You guys would never make it through the 4 hours. I did that. We always got to add some stuff to it. So, ask questions, make sure you maximize your time here. So, my phone number, if you have any questions afterwards, in clarification or whatever, is 303-913-1984. 303-913-1984. So, let's open it up and let's go to the first page where it says, Welcome to the 2016 Annual Commission Update Course. And it's recommended brokers take this between January and June, and you guys you're the good guys. Most brokers wait till December 20th to get this done, and that's just how the industry is most of the time. But that's okay as long as you get it done this year. Because as of January 1st, 2017, this class no longer exists. And every January we get calls from brokers who saying, I missed it last year. Say, sorry. So you're doing it right. And this is not a contracts class. It says brokers should consider taking a contracts course every year. And this year in particular, because they did change the buy and sell contract. And a lot of changes to it. Because they haven't changed it for over 2 years. Nothing new in the listing contract, but in the buy and sell contract. If you want a class in that and you'd like to come and have us come and teach you at your location, please let us know. Be glad to do that for you. We also have that on DVD. We have it on DVD and also on YouTube. So give us a call and we'll work with you as far as getting that class done. But it's real important that you know that contract because, again, several important changes on it. And it says this course offers fresh information brokers need now. And then it says compliance issues, general practice. These are the topics: general practice issues, new regulations, resources, commission news. Then we have compliance issues, reporting criminal convictions, office policy manuals, property disclosure issues, modifying approved forms, title insurance closing protection letters, mineral disclosures. Kind of interesting. Then it says reporting criminal convictions, being convicted of or pleading nolo contendere to a crime and failing to report to the commission is a common disciplinary action, and the division will receive notice from the CBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, of any licensee who has been arrested. Division investigators will follow the case to its conclusion. The licensee has 30 days after conviction to report findings to the commissions. I'm going to read, I've got some instructor notes below most of these pages that I will just read to you, so you can take notes as we go. Background: if a licensee is convicted or enters a plea of guilty or nolo contendere to a specific crimes, they are subject to disciplinary action by the commission. Moreover, they have requirement to notify the commission of the conviction or plea. And the Colorado Real Estate Commission can impose disciplinary action for convictions, but failure to report a separate violation. This is serious. I had sit in my office one day, and this lady came in. This is, about 5 years ago. And she came in crying. She said, my brother is just getting out of prison, and he was one of the top brokers in Colorado. She said, and what's happening is that everybody's just blocking his release, and the Real Estate Commission is getting involved because he never told them about this conviction. And I went, wow. I've never been involved with this before with anybody, and so I wrote this letter, and I gave it to her to give to him to kind of write it in his own language, and he did. And the Real Estate Commission came back and said they were not going to continue trying to block his release, but they did put a moratorium on getting his license back for 5 years. In other words, they take this serious. Okay, you know, we're dealing with people's lives here, with the most important decisions they're going to be making in their entire life. They've got to know who we are and where we're standing. So, next page, reporting criminal convictions again. Top 3 crimes brokers are found guilty of committing: theft, assault, and fraud. And of course, DUIs do not require reporting, but any type of felony. And reporting criminal convictions. Other crimes that must also be reported to the Commission: homicides, assaults, kidnapping and unlawful sexual behavior, arson, burglary, robbery, theft, forgery, obtaining a signature by deception, offering a false instrument for recording, dual contracting. That's where you have 2 contracts, one's a phony. I haven't seen that in a long time. But back in the 80s, it was not that unusual, especially when we were dealing with mainly assumptions and things like that back then. It was a zoo back then. My interest rates were 16, 17%. Not a lot of whole new loan selling going on back there. You bought a home by assuming one, pretty much, with very few exceptions. Forgery, obtaining a signature by deception, offering a false instrument for recording, dual contracts, and fraudulent sales in business, and violations of the Uniform Controlled Substances Act. And this is my notes again. Any violation meeting these rules must be reported. The state statute says convictions of or entering a plea of guilty to or entering a plea of nolo contendere to any crime listed in Article 3 of Title 18 or whatever, or any other like criminal under Colorado law, federal law, or the laws of other states must be reported to the Division of Real Estate. Each of these offenses carry both felony and misdemeanor charges depending on severity of offense. And what they can do, they can impose a fine not to exceed $2,500 for each separate offense. That's the maximum the Real Estate Commission can fine a real estate broker. The boards, like the Colorado Association of Realtors and all of the boards, the Jefferson County boards, all of them, Boulder board, they can actually have a maximum of $5,000. Isn't that something? Twice as much as the commission. Very rare where they will come up with something like that with the actual fine. But on the other ones, like mortgage brokers and particularly appraisers, have no limit on what the fine can be. The highest fine I've ever seen for an appraiser was $64,000. Isn't that something? So, anyway, $2,500 for each separate offense. They can censure your license, place license on probation and set terms of probation, temporarily or permanently suspend or revoke a license when a licensee is performing or is attempting to perform any of the following acts according to Colorado Real Estate Statute. Reporting criminal convictions. How to report criminal convictions to the division. Licensees shall make written notification to the division within 30 calendar days of conviction. The failure to report may result in additional sanctions. My notes again. Immediate notification of conviction plea for a violation required. A licensee shall make written notification to the commission within 30 calendar days following any of the any of the following: a plea of guilty or plea of nolo contendere to the conviction of any crime identified by the statute, a violation or aiding and abetting in the violation of a Colorado or federal law or housing law, any disciplinary action taken against a licensee in any other jurisdiction, if the licensee's actions would constitute a violation of the real estate license law in Colorado, a suspension or revocation, how's that, of a license, registration, or certification by Colorado or another state within the last 5 years for fraud, deceit, material misrepresentation, theft, or the breach of fiduciary duty. And these are what they're talking about. They're talking about A, real estate appraiser, an insurance producer, an attorney, securities broker dealer, securities sales representative, an investment advisor, and investment advisor representative. Kind of odd, but any profession that we have, they could take our license away. We have to report that if we had a license taken away in another jurisdiction in another state for all of these professional occupations. But for some reason, CPAs have ducked under the radar, and they don't have to report if they've lost their license in another state. Kind of odd. I don't know why CPAs, but anyway. Let's go to compliance issues, reporting criminal. Then we have office policy manuals. Let's go to that part. Next page. Does your office have an office policy manual? It better have one. If not, come see me after class, and I'll direct you to where to go in the real estate manual to get one done. Get one done. It's going to take you an hour, 2 hours maybe to get one done, guys. There's not a lot of brain damage, and the real estate manual does an excellent job of guiding you in how to develop that manual. My manual I have is like 8 pages, double spaced. You can read it in 20 minutes. And if yours is some telephone book or anything, come see me. Let's get that down where it makes sense, okay? Has the manual been given to you, electronically or on paper? Have you signed the manual or an acknowledgement that you've read the manual? And here's my notes. Ask for a show of hands for each question. Anybody here, do you have a copy of, those of you who are licensed, who's working in the industry right now, do you have a copy of your office policy manual? Cool.
Two
Cool.
copies.
You have 2 of them?
Yep.
Good,
They
good.
gave me an extra.
Overkill's better than none. I had a student call me, this couple of years ago, and she said, I'm leaving my company, can I take my listings with me? And I said, I don't know, go look in your office policy manual and see. She said, well, I don't have one. And I said, well, go to the receptionist and ask her for a copy. And she said, well, if I do, they might think I'm leaving. And I said, well, you are leaving. And she said, I'm not comfortable doing that. I said, what do you want from me? I don't, yes, you can take your listings. I don't know. Don't take your listings, But again, that's why you need that office policy manual, and you sign for it also. Requiring employing brokers to demonstrate reasonable supervision for all licensees and non-licensed employees. This is what should be in it, of course. To comply with these rules, an office policy manual is required. And the main purpose of an office policy manual is to show how we're working with the public. A lot of confusion out there right now about when you should be working as an agent or a transaction broker. A lot of confusion. And if there is any questions about that in particulars, give me a call. Be glad to talk to you about it. And next page, office policy manual, the rules. Every broker associate should have a copy or access to an electronic copy of office policy manual. Sign an acknowledgement of having received and read the office policy manual for their firm. And suggest you find a copy when you go home, or the notes there. And then we have the Real Estate Commission, next page. Rules require that employing brokers adhere to a set of broker supervising responsibilities. To help brokers comply with the rules, the Commission requires that each office maintain an office policy manual. And Commission Position 21 and the Rule E30C establish what needs to be covered in office policy manuals. There it is. Right there, but there's a couple other places in the manual I can direct you to if you need help. And key point, all brokerages, even independents, must have an office policy manual. Isn't that something? For your own self, you have to have one. And Commission state statutes set out a broker supervising responsibilities. If one or more of the topics suggested in the state statute is not a part of your office policy, the policy manual should state the office does not participate in this practice. Guaranteed buyouts. This office does not participate in guaranteed buyouts, as an example. This company does not get involved in property management. Things like that. That's fairly common. Any questions about that? Anything in particular? Next one. Office policy manuals. Minimum areas of coverage. The state statute, at a minimum, the office policy should cover these 17 areas of practice. brokerage relationships offered by the firm, including processes for the different relationships offered, the process used for a typical real estate transaction, maintenance and protection of confidential information, fair housing and affirmative action marketing, and delegation of authority. My notes. If one of these 17 areas of business are not applicable, the areas of practice should be addressed in the office policy manual by stating that the brokerage does not participate in that activity. And, my notes again, establish procedures for designation of brokers who are to work with a seller, landlord, buyer, or tenant, individually or in teams. It does not apply to the brokerage firms that consist of only one licensed natural person, and does not apply to brokerage with only one licensed agent. And this Rule E38 requires teams to be addressed. You have to address how you're working with teams if they are allowed. And review of the contracts, the earnest money and release thereof, backup contracts, closings. How do we handle those? Identify and provide adequate means and procedures for the maintenance and protection of confidential information. And that's required by Rule E39, if you want to write that down. Rules for compliance with fair housing laws. How and whom may the employing broker or other broker delegate authority? And should be in writing. Remember, designated brokerage in Colorado. We handle it differently than any other state. And it's the employing broker who determines designated agency. Next page. Property management. How do we handle property management? If you do, property listing procedures, including release of listings, licensees' purchases and sales of property, monitoring of license renewals and transfers, training offered by the firm, personal assistance, how we handle those. My notes. Jumping up to 6 there. If not allowed in the brokerage, or if only by certain designated associates, this should be addressed. Also, trust accounts must meet commission rules and regulations. Is anybody in here an employing broker? Nobody. Okay. An employing broker may set minimum commissions allowed per side without the employing broker entering into the negotiations. And no broker associate may negotiate below 1.75% per side without permission of the employing broker. Write that down, guys. You know, we got these people out there, when you're looking at whenever you have a seller's market, we have these, I hate to call them pariahs, but I've been in this business so long, and they come and they go. I'll put your home in the MLS for $1,000. You see them out there, hear about it, hear them on the phone, on the radio. And again, we cannot take a listing for less than 1.75%. And if you take one for even for that, whatever, it has to be full. You have to be able to give full service, no matter how much you're charging, no matter how low it is. And the Real Estate Commission is looking at these low-end listings. All these people, a lot of these people, give me $1,000, I'll just throw it in the MLS and good luck. Any questions on that? So again, make sure you're doing your due diligence when it comes to your listings. And 1.75%.
Is that for just, that's just one end, right?
Per side.
Per side.
Per side, yes, per side. So again, you're like a 1.75%, and in the MLS, at least 1.75%. You put in the MLS at 1.75%, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of showings, but who knows? You know, we're not in this business for our health, although it does affect it. So, and moving along here, set requirements for proving the broker associate is in compliance with continuation requirements for renewal, and should include dissemination of information, staff meetings, etc. Establish if personal assistants are allowed. And these personal assistants, does anybody here have personal assistants under them? I'll tell you what, if you get so busy you need a personal assistant and you don't get one, you become your own personal assistant. This is a part of our industry. We're one of the few states that allow unlicensed personal assistants. Take advantage of that opportunity. But one thing, make sure they have their separate errors and omissions. That's the mistake a lot of brokers make. Because if they come after you for something they did, it may not be covered unless they have their own separate policy.
So you said an unlicensed?
Unlicensed assistants, yeah, make sure they have their
Can
own
have errors and commissions?
errors and omissions, yeah. It's separate errors and omissions from what you have. I like it, Marilyn. That means you're thinking ahead. You're going to have one someday. Good, I like it. I like it.
I didn't know that unlicensed.
Hopefully you have several unlicensed assistants. Wouldn't that be nice? Huh?
What can the unlicensed assistants do? It's been a long
Okay.
time since I've been in school.
Unlicensed assistants can do everything a licensed broker can do. I should repeat the question. I'm sorry. The question was, what can licensed assistants do? They can do everything we can do, except negotiate and fill out contracts, which is about everything we do, pretty much. They can sit open houses with the permission of the seller, okay? They can pass out brochures at the open houses. They can do a CMA, a competitive or comparable market analysis, and give it to the broker, and the broker can pass it out as long as they say that it was an unlicensed assistant that did it.
What if you have your license and you just wanted to be an assistant?
What if you have your license and you want to be an assistant? And this happens quite a bit too, where you're just really, somebody calls you up and you get your license and you go and need somebody for a cut of that deal, cut of the deals they do. That's wonderful, where you're teaming up with somebody as an unlicensed assistant. And usually then your broker that you're doing that with, your friend or whoever they are, she's held at a higher standard for what they're compensating you for, because you have paid the price to be licensed.
Because I thought if you were unlicensed, you didn't have to have errors and omissions.
If you're unlicensed, you don't have to have errors and omissions. Do it anyway. Do it anyway, because you don't know. Make them pay for it, or you pay for it,
What
whatever.
about showings?
And goes, pardon me.
Showings.
Let's stay on this topic for just a minute, and then we'll jump to showings. Okay. The point is, like I said, they may or may not be covered under your errors and omissions for some that they do. And there's places to go like Crest Direct, CRES Direct, not with a T. Is that what you have it, Grace?
The whole time, yep.
Have you so far? Let me ask you.
So cheap.
How much is it? How much do you
I
pay?
got 160 to renew it this year.
160. I'm with Williams.
Yeah.
I pay $275. So you save quite a bit of money. I like Crest Direct because it's based on last year's production. And of course, if you're new in the industry, or if you're an unlicensed assistant, you didn't have any production last year.
So it'll go up every year.
It will. It'll go up. Hopefully it'll go up a whole lot.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll go up where they won't even cover you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, and they won't. You get doing too much business, they'll say, "Well, call up another company. You're
That's
doing
what we
way too
want."
much business." Yeah, yeah. My night instructor Tony, who teaches the night classes, that's what happened to him. Crest Direct wouldn't cover him. He does too much business. I'm like, good. I want that problem. You know, who doesn't?
That's true.
Then continuing.
Wait, what about showings? Can your
Oh, I'm
sister do
sorry.
showings?
Can they do showings? Again, they can't go in the home without the seller's permission. Okay? And what are you doing? You're calling usually a showing company to go in that home. So be very careful if you're having them out there showing properties, because they're not really getting the seller's permission to get in that home. Does it happen? Yeah. Yeah, most people with unlicensed assistants just say, "Yeah, go show my people properties." Boy, be very careful. Be very careful doing that. You're not supposed to do that. Let them into the home without the seller's permission. So again,
So
they're
they
not
can-
licensed.
They can actually get the lockbox codes and everything, and call up. And
That's why we have to have the seller's permission, because they are getting the lockbox codes and everything else. Okay, and they're not licensed, so the real estate commission doesn't even know who these people exist.
Right.
They know you exist, so make sure you do that right. Sitting open houses are wonderful. You can tell them, "Yeah, I'm going to have one of my assistants with me on Saturday." Say, "Cool, we don't care. That's fine. She's not licensed. He's not licensed. As long as you say it's okay, it's fine with me." The seller usually doesn't care about that. Another thing about showings and open houses, something you guys might want to consider, and so few brokers do this: having open houses during the week, at night. Yeah, especially in the summer. We're getting to the summertime of the year. Nobody's doing open houses on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
No.
And all these people coming home from work and they see your signs out there. Tell you what, that could, of course, not, you really don't need to do that. Open houses, you're going to get mobbed anyway, but still, especially with this market. Let's keep next one. 17 areas of practice. Again, not qualifying assumption. Non-qual, of course, they don't exist anymore. Last one we did was in 1990, so they're pretty much gone. If they're out there, very rare. Owner financing. Whenever you have trouble with a deal, guys, look to the seller for help. Guaranteed buyouts. Shoot, I'll do guaranteed buyouts all day long in this market. I'll take a 6-hour listing with guaranteed. That's an exaggeration, but yeah. But even when the market was tough, there were still brokers out there doing guaranteed buyouts. Make sure you do them correctly. Investor purchases, teams, and teams are wonderful. Wonderful. If you get on the right team, get the right people around you, teams can really help your business. And what I suggest is if you get your team, put them underneath a separate corporate umbrella. That way you have a double protection in case something happens on that team that might filter to you. You don't have to do it that way, but it's not a bad way to get that done. And if you do form a separate corporation, you have to have a separate errors and omissions insurance for the corporation itself. Any questions on that? And then we have listing syndications. You know, you're setting up your team again to take a bunch of properties, put them underneath. Maybe you've got, and this usually is an offshoot of property management many times. And then performance of and compensation for real estate related activities. Broker price opinions, BPOs. We don't do BPOs right now. BPOs, of course, are done when the bank ends up with the property. Again, broker price opinions. And they were going crazy on BPOs 4 or 5 years ago. Now we just really don't do them much anymore. That'll come back, but still, I really dissuade brokers from doing BPOs if you can help it. First of all, you're not an appraiser, so your liability is through the roof. If you get sued, your errors and omissions may not cover you because you're outside of your expertise. So be very careful of BPOs. Plus, they pay you $40-50. Had a buddy of mine who was doing it, and he said he was averaging about $7 an hour after he paid for his gas and everything, doing BPOs. So, and the commission does not like them. The real estate commission, I'll tell you, they really, if you get in trouble for doing a BPO, guys, it could be ugly. And performance of and compensation for real estate related activities, like in that broker price opinion. Okay. Next one, property disclosure issues. Latent defects, hidden defects. Latent means hidden. Definition from Nolo's Plain English Law Dictionary. A hidden flaw, weakness, or imperfection that cannot be discovered by reasonable inspection. And the contract to buy, this section 10.2, disclosure of latent defects. Seller must disclose to the buyer any latent defects actually known by the seller. And seller agrees that disclosure of latent defects will be in writing. And of course, that's the seller's disclosure. We have one of the most powerful seller's disclosures in the nation. It's 6 pages, single spaced. It really covers us to a point, okay? We still have to do our due diligence and make sure everything in there is covered. I got a couple horror stories. I'm not going to go into it right now, where an actual seller's disclosure was overridden in court, and the person who bought the house had to pay for something that the people who did the seller's disclosure lied like a rug. So, my notes again. If the seller has to ask if something should be disclosed, the answer is, oh yeah, oh yeah. And from Wikipedia, the general law of the sale of property is, again, caveat emptor. Buyer beware, of course. And buyers are under a general duty to inspect their purchases before taking possession. Isn't that something? The buyer has an obligation to know what they're buying. I like that. However, I don't like that. I just changed what I just said, right? It is understood that by law that inspection is not often sufficient to detect certain deficiencies in the product that can only be discovered through destructive testing or other means that a seller could not reasonably be expected to allow under normal conditions. There's damage to the house for this.
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry.
Which one?
What the last sentence you just said.
Okay, it is understood at law that inspection is not often sufficient to detect certain deficiencies. In other words, they might have to do some damage to the property to find something. They check out the foundation and have to drill some holes or whatever. Mold inspections a lot of times can be real destructive. I had a student one time, and she and her roommates, she was moving into the place, and her bedpost accidentally poked a hole through the wall, and the whole back side of her wall was solid with mold.
Oh my God.
And it was a duplex, and the owner lived on the other side of the duplex, and he had no idea it was like this. And so the poor guy and her, she did move in. 2 days later, she had 3 other roommates. The 2 of them had to move out. They were just sick. It was really, really bad mold. And this poor seller's doing everything he can to fix it because it's affecting him too, obviously. And essentially, this place, wow. They just about had to rebuild it to get rid of that mold. It was that bad. Denver is one of the worst places for mold in the nation. People don't realize this. They say, Seattle and Portland, they know they have a mold problem. We don't think we do. And because of that, we have a huge mold problem here. And it's so important that you talk to your people about that. And let them know that you're probably going to have mold in every house you have. There's mold in every property. It's part of our environment. It's part of our existence. Mold is everywhere. It just is. If you look at the studs they're putting in walls of houses now, and you see those studs sitting on front of the home that they're going to start building the home is, go over and look at that pile of studs that are sitting there. They don't fire dry them like they used to, as hard as they still do, but not nearly as much as they used to. And you'll see green stripes in these studs that they're going to be put in these homes. That's mold. So even the construction of the home brings mold into that situation. Now, is this something to be, very concerned with? And I'm not, first of all, the appraiser and the inspector will always mention that they notice mold in the house. Always, always. Just because they have to, just a CYA thing, cover your asset thing. And so because of that, you've got to tell your people, expect to see it in their reports. You will see it in their reports. And the reason is because they have to say that there's mold in those houses, but the good inspectors, the good appraisers will explain it further. There's mold in the house, there's mold in every property. Whether it's dangerous mold or not may need additional inspection or something like that. But if they just leave it hanging out there, mold in the house, they're out there just killing our deals for no reason. They really don't understand what they're doing by making statements like that. Anyway, that's a whole course we teach on mold. And we're not going to jump ahead. I could go on that. I could talk for the next couple hours. So let's go to the next section here. Stigmatized properties. Isn't this wild? They changed this. This is the murder and suicide thing, where we cannot report it, either the buyer or the seller's broker. We can't report it without the seller's permission, and then we have no duty to disclose it. This is not only murders and suicides, but any felony that was ever committed in it. Let's read this. The state statute defines stigmatized properties as circumstances that psychologically impact the property, including but not limited to facts or suspicions regarding AIDS, homicide, other felonies, suicides. Next page. When working with a buyer or tenant, exclusive right to buy contract, the uniform duty that referred to stigmatized properties has been removed. Let's read that again. The uniform duty that referred to stigmatized property has been removed. There is no duty to disclose, and no duty to have sellers informed consent. The same holds true for the exclusive tenant contract. Let's read this. This is my notes. The buyer, write this down, guys. The buyer's broker may disclose if asked, or may choose to disclose, or may choose to disclose stigmatized issues without the seller's permission. This is only the buyer's broker, okay?
John, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, the buyer's broker can disclose.
Only if you choose to.
Only if you choose to. Well, you can disclose it. You don't have to have the seller's permission. Remember, you used to have the seller's permission before we could disclose there was a murder in this house. And then even with their permission, we had no duty to disclose it. Well, now the listing I'm sorry, Grace, you keep
So
trying to raise your hand.
Do we have to? We don't have to disclose
No,
it,
you can.
but you can if you want to.
First of all, you as a listing broker can't disclose it
Can't.
without the seller's permission, but then you have no duty to disclose it. Now, the buyer's broker used to be the same thing. We couldn't disclose it without the seller's permission. Then we had no duty to disclose it. Well, they've changed it now where the buyer can do it if he wants to.
If you want.
Now, let's face it. If you know there's been a murder in that house, just don't go show that house. Of course, in our inventory now, you probably would show it. You know? What a shame, you know. But anyway, just be careful. Just be careful. Let me read the rest of this here.
I would
Jim, real
know.
quick,
Yeah.
is that including like hauntings, haunted houses?
Haunted houses. That's another hour answer. It'd be a fun hour, but we're not going to go there all the way. No, haunted houses, that's no disclosure. That's not a psychological issue. They don't consider that a psychological issue. I'm going to go out on a limb here because nobody knows about this law. It was passed in 1986, and it was actually confirmed by the Supreme Court, and it says that haunted houses must be disclosed. Nobody knows this law. Nobody adheres to it. Nobody even knows it exists. Okay? I ran into it by accident one time in one of my studies. Isn't that crazy? So you didn't hear me say that. Okay?
How do they like label it as a haunted house?
Exactly.
Hearsay.
You know, I think it's haunted, you know, because I heard something fall in the kitchen when I was in the other room. Something like that. So it must be haunted.
Oh, I
That's
showed one
why-
recently that I'm pretty
That'd
sure
be
was haunted.
fun.
Yeah.
It was
Do
like
you have a story for us?
150 years old.
I have a mold story. A horrible, horrible mold
You have a
story.
mold story?
They
Lay on
had
us.
to do the whole. Well, we went and bought a house up in Broomfield. It's on a farm, and they told us, "Oh, everything's fine, it's fabulous." Apparently, the inspector wasn't a mold inspector. So we buy the house. It's my family. Buy the house. They find out everything is wrong with it. They had to gut out the whole entire basement.
Whoa.
Kids got sick. Apparently, the realtor didn't know because their inspector wasn't mold certified and let us buy the house with black mold in it.
This is really, I'm
It was
glad you
horrible.
brought this up. Guys, inspectors aren't licensed, they're not certified. You go out and buy a ladder and a flashlight and a ruler, and all of a sudden you're an inspector. Make sure you check inspectors out.
He was
These-
the greatest in Colorado, is what our realtor told us.
He's the greatest in Colorado. See, and this is a good point. So this is what your realtor told you. He's the greatest inspector in Colorado. Wow. There's a liability issue against that broker for
And he
saying
was our
that,
neighbor
guys.
for like 10 years, or the realtor was like, it was huge. And one of my friends.
Let's go back, let's cover this. I'm glad you brought this out. There's the rule of 3. Give 3 referrals, guys. Give 3 referrals. You know, I wish I could say I do that all the time. I fall short on that because there's my people that I really like in this industry.
I used Ken.
And
Ken Ishmael.
you should give 3 names. And when it comes to inspectors, guys, when you find a good one, hold on to him with both arms. You bet. And the good inspector, I've got a friend of mine who does inspections. If you like his name and number, I'll be glad to give it to you. I'm not going to do it on the tape here. But I've been with him on inspections. 4 hours on an average is in these homes. He's a real estate broker, so he knows our business. He used to be an appraiser. He let that license go, but he's worked on site, building homes. He's been a supervisor on site. Here's a
He's
guy who
fast,
knows
too.
homes,
Fast.
man. Really good. You have an inspector who's in out of that home in 20 minutes? Wow. Order another inspection. Word to the wise. Who orders the inspection? Which broker?
Buyer's broker.
The buyer's broker does. The buyer's broker does. And if the buyer says, I've got a cousin who's an inspector, I got a good friend who's an inspector, say, conflict of interest, can't use them. Force them to use your appraiser, or your inspectors, guys. Force them to. Word to the wise, okay?
What if they say they don't want it?
They don't want an inspection?
Yeah. I'll do it myself. I've heard that.
I'll tell you what, if you want it, I don't want an inspection, do it myself. First of all, there's a loan on it, there will be an inspection. The lender will require it, and usually the title company will require it too. You better believe it. The only time there's not going to be inspections is if it's a cash deal. Okay? Now, if I'm looking at a home to flip it and I'm going to buy it myself, like going down this road might take a while. Okay, I'll slow it down a little bit. Speed it up, I should say. But what happens when you're doing that and you're putting properties on the market and whatever, make sure that you tell your people a lot of this stuff up front. You know, we're going to get an inspection on your home. It's very important we get the right inspector in there. I'm going to give you a list, and please, that's one thing I'm going to insist on. I will pick out the inspector. And I'll tell you, that's going to save you a lot of grief. It really will. You get a bad inspector in there, and I've seen inspections that are just laughable until you start crying. You know? So again, if it's an REO home owned by a bank, and you require an appraisal in your contract, usually that bank will kick out that deal, because if you got to know what the value is now, what it's going to cost to fix it, what it's going to be worth later, well, you shouldn't be looking at this home. So if it's an REO, they usually they won't let you even do an appraisal. But I would never ever sell a property or allow one of my clients to ever buy or sell a property without two things: an inspection and what else do you think? Title policy. Title policy. You better believe it. I would never sell a home without a title policy, no matter what. A lot of times you work on these $1 million houses, and these people are cash deals. No, there's no inspection required, and they don't no title insurance required or anything. I'll say, listen, we're not going to closing without a title insurance policy. Well, I've known Joe for 40 years. He'd never do anything to screw me around. Well, Joe might not know about something wrong with that title. Always dig in your heels. Require everybody you do in your cash deals to get an inspection and a title insurance policy. An appraisal, that's optional, especially on a cash deal. But I'll tell you what, that inspection and that title policy, don't ever make that optional. Word to the wise. Word to the wise. Okay, so we're getting back to psychologically impacted properties. The buyer, again, does not have the seller's permission to disclose. Let's go to the next one. When working with the seller, exclusive right to sell listing contracts, there's no duty to disclose. And they may not disclose without the informed written consent of the seller to do so. We can't disclose it without the seller's permission, and the same holds true for exclusive right to lease listings. Okay. Let's go to the next one. Property disclosure issues. A pot-growing grandma who has IV dies in her home from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a cracked heat exchange in the furnace. The heirs list the home as is. With you, what if anything must be disclosed to the buyer? Let's go to the next one. Property disclosure issues. Practical situations. A pot-going grandma has HIV, dies in her home from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a cracked heat exchanger. Do any of the following need to be disclosed? The furnace. Yes. How about and the death of the grandma?
No.
Yes.
Unless-
with the permission
with
from
the
the
permission.
seller. Only with permission from the seller, and it doesn't have to be disclosed, of course.
Right.
And how about the HIV?
No.
We can't disclose that. That's part of a fair housing issue. That's a political hot potato. You can never disclose someone had AIDS or HIV even in the house. And marijuana. No, but you should, as there may be issues around mold in the growing of the plants. Amen to that. Boy, we're hearing some horror stories coming out of houses
So it's
that
no.
had mold, that had marijuana growing in the basements and whatever. So, let's go to the next one. Modifying approved forms. Allowing modifications to approved forms. Brokers are allowed to Add the firm name, address, telephone, email, trademark, or other identifying information. Add initial lines at the bottom of the page. Lengthen or shorten blank spaces. Add signature lines and identifying labels. We have to use approved forms. We have to be careful about what we're doing with them and how we handle them. Can we put things outside of the listing? Sure we can. Sure we can. But make sure you're being very careful about it. You cannot change any of the verbiage within the contract yourself. An attorney can, who's working with one of the parties, but we can't. Now, that's the next one. Brokers are allowed to add a page to the contract to buy and sell real estate, the counter proposal and the agreement to amend extend contract, containing dates and deadlines and information like that. Add signature lines and identifying labels. They can insert provisions into the blank sections of the contract. All insertions must use a different font than that used in the approved contract form. And of course, the pre-licensing students, they use that word, what's the word they use? Differentiated print. It has to look different than the rest of the form. Differentiated print, in case someone should ask you. It has to look different. Now, let's go to the next one. What provisions can be omitted? The inclusions, the exclusions, the seller concessions. These are things we can take out because we have the type of contracts that we're purchasing that we can eliminate parts of the contract. Again, the inclusions, the exclusions, seller concessions, the new loan in its entirety or subsections, any assumptions. And of course, you're going to eliminate that. We just haven't had assumptions for many, many years. We're going to start having them again as the interest rates go up. It will inevitably happen. And seller or private financing. Don't have to disclose it. Next one, financing conditions and obligations in its entirety or subsections. Appraisal provisions in its entirety. Of course, we're going to check one of those appraisal provisions, whatever type of appraisal it is. Homeowner Association docs in the entirety or subsection. Special taxing districts. And right of first refusal or contract approval. So those things we can knock out, but we have to keep the title. We have to keep the title, we can knock out the body. Next one, due diligence documents. This is confusing. The due diligence documents, all of these documents are due diligence documents. Everything, all of our contracts, every piece of paper we have in a transaction is a due diligence documents. If there are separate due diligence documents that we need to have, make sure we have them in there. Let's continue here. Due diligence docs conditions in its entirety or subsections. Due diligence environmental or Americans with Disabilities Act. Source of potable or potable water. We have to have that now. Every seller has to have that potable or potable water disclosure, saying where am I getting my water for my property and what is its availability for future consumption. It has to be filled out by every seller. Environmental. I already got that. Potable water. Existing leases. Modification of existing leases. New leases, whatever. We can eliminate that. You know, most properties don't have a tenant in it, but it could. Tenant estoppel statements. What does that mean? That means that when you return your last deposit back to them for the security deposit, you have an estoppel statement which stops the tenant from coming back to you for more money. It's called an estoppel statement, and we can eliminate that contract if there's no renters. Status and transfer letter fees. Sales and use taxes on the property. Most of these sales taxes, use taxes, transfer taxes, we just don't have them in Denver. We have them in the recreational areas primarily. But be careful. With all these new subdivisions coming in, there could be some taxes along those or just, I should say transfer fees along those areas. Rents and association assessments. In other words, we can eliminate those if they're not part of the deal. Next one. Provisions that can be omitted again. Counter proposals and agreements to amend, extend dates and deadlines tables in counter proposals, encounters. Of course, the purchase price and terms. Next one, how to delete provisions. When using a printed form, strike through the amended or deleted portion of in a legible manner and do not obscure the deletion. I remember back in the good old days when we didn't have computers and everything was handwritten. We used to have to scratch out every letter of every word, but we had to be able to read the letter underneath the oh yeah, pretty wild. Now, of course, we can't do that. And so just be careful. Do not obscure the deletion. And when using a computer-generated form, the provisions, caption, or heading must remain unaltered, followed by the word omitted. Omitted. Again, you have to keep the heading appraisals, commercial or conventional appraisals, and eliminate all the wording after it, but you have to have what it was, what the heading was. That make sense? So remember to do that. And of course, in the e-contracts, whatever other, I shouldn't promote e-contracts, but that's the most popular one. Many other contracts you can buy, where you can do different omissions and everything within those contracts. Okay, next page. When we're changing forms, form reproduction and legibility, it is the broker's responsibility that all forms are legible, readable. Can we have a contract that's part handwritten and part typed? Sure, you bet. Most of them are. I mean, these contracts are 17 pages. They're huge. It's a rare contract. I'll level with you. Where I write out a contract all typed out, beautiful and everything. I go over with my people. I forgot to fill in that space. Can I just take out my pen and fill that in? Yes, I can, as long as it's legible. Do they have to initial it? No. It just has to be legible. That makes sense? And that'll happen to you guys too. You know, I mean, I was in this business long before computers. Everything was handwritten. If you turned in a typed contract, they looked at you like you were weird. Like, what are you doing, carrying around a typewriter with you? How many people here have never heard of typewriters? You'd be surprised in my classes how many hands go up. Boy, does that make you feel old? Never heard of a typewriter. Can you imagine? Yeah. Carbon paper. Never heard of carbon paper. It's a different world back then compared to now. And computer-generated form software must prevent inadvertent changes or prohibited modification. My notes. Commission-approved forms used by a broker, including permitted modifications made by a broker, shall be, again, legible. They like that word, legible. Brokers generating commission-approved forms through the use of a computer shall ensure that a security software program is utilized that prevents inadvertent change or prohibited modification of commission-approved forms by the broker or other computer user. And this is interesting. This brings back memories. This next one. That's what we used to do. That's a lot of brokers did. Just scratch it out like that. Some of the contracts back then were pretty incredible. Practical situation. Is this deletion acceptable? Is this okay? This is my notes. Is this okay or not okay? The answer, not okay. For two reasons, obviously. The text is obscured. Earnest money is not a provision allowed to be omitted. Any deletion to the printed body of a commission-approved form or any additional provision or addenda which by its terms serves to amend or delete portions of the approved language must result from negotiations or the instructions of a party to the transaction and must be made directly on the printed body of the form by striking through the amended or deleted portion in a legible manner that does not obscure the deletion that has been made. And again, that is totally obscured. I mean, that's embarrassing. That would be embarrassing. I've seen worse than this, though, by brokers. And again, continuing, is this deletion acceptable? On the next page. Is this okay or not okay? This is perfectly okay. This is my notes again. These are perfectly okay. Clean strike out without obscuring the deletion provision. And that's what we do. We Z it out. That's how I do it. I put a line through the top. I put a line through the top line, a line through the bottom line with a ruler. I couldn't draw a straight line if you had $1 million check sitting here. With a ruler and then a Z through it. Z it out. Don't just put an X through it like that. Make sure you do that correctly. Keep it clean. When adding or deleting provisions, provisions must come from negotiations or instructions of the parties. In the CBS contract to buy and sell, this is the seller or buyer, not the broker. Broker may not add personal provisions, personal disclaimers, or there's that word exculpatory. That's hold harmless clauses. Protective language. We cannot have protective language. You know, no matter how many mistakes I make, you can't sue me. Something like that. Can't have it. In favor of the broker when the broker is not a principal party. And provisions do not trump compliance with the rules and license law. Now, these are my notes. Let me read this one part here. The additional provisions section of the commission-approved form must contain only those transaction-specific terms. We can't have disclosures that we're going to use on every contract from now on. I'm an appraiser. I own the biggest appraisal firm in Colorado for 12 years. And we did have transaction-specific language that we used for every appraisal that we did in various forms, and that's fine in an appraisal, but not in a contract. Or acknowledgments that result from negotiations and the instructions of the parties to the transaction. And another prohibited provision, no contract provision including modifications permitted by the statute shall relieve a broker from compliance with the real estate license law or the rules of the commission. Next page, explain it. Modifications, deletions, omissions, insertions, additional provisions, and addenda must be explained to the principals. They must recommend parties obtain expert advice as to material matters beyond the expertise of the broker. And again, we as brokers, unfortunately, know enough to be dangerous out there. We know a little bit about electricity, a little bit about plumbing, a little bit about financing, a little bit about cracked driveways, whatever. Whenever there's a question beyond our expertise, we transfer liability. Second most important law in all of real estate, transfer liability. Whenever you transfer liability, somebody else pays for it, the buyer or the seller or both. The only time transferring liability costs you something is when you don't do it. Well, that might be price of admission right there today. Don't make that mistake. Get the experts in there. That's what they're there for. Let me read what I have here. The broker shall explain all permitted modifications, deletions, omissions, insertions, additional provisions, and addenda to the principal party, and must recommend that the parties obtain expert advice as to the material matters that are beyond the expertise of the broker. Pretty simple English. There's a liability issue. We better do it right. Next page. Let's go to the title insurance closing protection letter. What is a closing protection letter? CPL. They even have initials for it now. A typical CPL form or contract between the title insurance underwriter in which the underwriter agrees to indemnify the lender for certain acts or misconduct by the closing agent. A typical CPL covers failure of the closing agent to follow written closing instructions, fraud or dishonesty in handling a lender's funds or documents by the closing agent. These are my notes. Most CPLs expressly extend coverage to homeowners that are addressed to their lenders. If you are a lender protected under the foregoing paragraph, your borrower, your assignee, and your warehouse lender in connection with the loan secured by a mortgage shall be protected. as if this letter were addressed to them. And this is about the American Land Title Association has a standard form CPL, and that's for some guidance. So this closing lady can have protective language. They can protect themselves because they are not part of the transaction. We are. We're responsible for what's on those closing documents, even though we're not preparing them. So that's why they have that there. Mineral disclosures. It says oil, gas, water, mineral disclosures. The surface estate of the property may be owned. I always read this to my people. This is in big bold print in our contracts. I always read it to them because they have no clue what they're actually purchasing when it comes to things outside of the home itself. The surface estate of the property may be owned separately from the underlying mineral estate, and transfer of the surface estate may not necessarily include transfer of the mineral estate or water rights. Third parties may own or lease interest in the oil, gas, other minerals, geothermal energy, or water on or under the surface of the property, which interests may give them rights to enter and use the surface of the property to access the mineral estate, oil, gas, or water. And warrants buyer, someone else may own and control the mineral and other surface rights, which may give them rights to enter and extract minerals. Whenever you have a right to a property, you always have a right of procurement. I rent this farm, I plant crops. Those are my crops, they're my personal property. My lease ends, I have a right to go on that property to procure my interest when those crops are ready. Same with this. Usually a developer will retain the mineral rights, if there are any. They will retain them themselves because they want to make sure that your neighbor doesn't go dingy and think there's oil on his property and start drilling. Which isn't going to happen because they have to get a permit to do that, of course. But again, those mineral rights, again, when you're buying property in the city, we don't get our mineral rights. Who owns the mineral rights? The government owns 70% of them, and the rest are owned by the railroads, for the most part. After the Civil War, the government didn't have any money, and they told the railroads, go ahead and start putting in your tracks, and we will give you 5 miles of land on each side of the tracks. And they did. And these railroads, as they sold this property off, retained the mineral rights for themselves. So again, we don't own our mineral rights in the city. Very rarely. And it doesn't even enter our mind, the mineral rights. Good thing, because we don't get them. Okay, why don't we take a 10-minute break? Okay, let's continue here. We're on page 38, and we're talking about this mineral disclosure. Let's just read this right here. Now, this is word for word out of the buy and sell contract and on mineral rights. You should always read these to your people word for word because, again, they don't understand mineral rights. It's easy to explain. It keeps from having a problem later, and it also increases your credibility and professionalism in your client's eyes. So let's read this. Oil, gas, water, and mineral disclosure. The surface estate of the property may be owned separately from the underlying mineral estate, and transfer of the surface estate may not necessarily include transfer of the mineral estate or water rights. Third parties may own or lease interest in oil, gas, other minerals, geothermal energy, or water on or under the surface of the property, which interest may give them rights to enter and use the surface of the property to access the mineral estate, oil, gas, or water. And warrants buyers, someone may else own and control the mineral and other subsurface rights, which may give them the right to enter and extract minerals, etc. And of course, they can't extract these minerals usually without a permit of some kind, depending on what kind of minerals they're after, like oil or whatever. But nonetheless, you do have a right of procurement, along with your right of ownership. You want to go in that much detail with them? Kind of glance over it. Up to you how you want to handle it. Your employing broker should be able to help you. If you're an employing broker, make sure you're comfortable with the explanation. And look at this, and this is my notes here, guys. Recommended time that it says the purchase of the property may not include all or any of the mineral rights and may be subject to a lease. The property may be subject to a surface use agreement, meaning the owner of the mineral rights can enter the property to extract the minerals. Oil and gas activity may occur on or adjacent to the property, and the buyer should seek additional information before purchasing the property. Mineral rights may not be covered by title insurance. They typically are not. Remember, you've got your ownership interest in your real property, which includes them all bundled to the center of the earth, to the heights of heaven, and everything in between. They're not separately set out with their own title insurance. So just be aware of that. Let's keep going here. Next page. It says, oil and gas activity. Oil and gas activity that may occur on or adjacent to the property may include, but is not limited to, surveying, drilling, well competition operations. Well completion operations, how's that? Competition without my glasses. Operations, storage, oil and gas, oil production facilities, producing wells, reworking of current wells, and gas gathering and processing facilities. And it warns the buyer that may be activities on the adjacent property that might impact their enjoyment. Full disclosure, full disclosure. Next page. We have mineral disclosures again. Additional information. Buyer is encouraged to seek additional information regarding oil and gas activity on or adjacent to the property, including drilling permit applications. This information may be available from the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and warns the buyer to seek additional information prior to purchasing again. Next page, title insurance exclusions. Matters set forth in this section and others may be accepted, excluded from, or not covered by the owner's title insurance policy. Next page, talking about the next general practice issues. Let's go to page 44. CBS new and ongoing issues. Section 2.2, again, this is not a contracts class. You can reference this off of your buy and sell agreement if you want to. Assignability. Let's read the inclusions and fixtures, appraisal inspection objections, applicability of terms, evidence of record, selecting and paying the title company, and section 8.3 off-record title, and sections 10.2. These are all very well enumerated in our contract, as most of you are very much aware. And down below, underneath that 5 there, it talks about evidence of record ongoing. This is my notes again. Evidence of record ongoing issues. Selecting and paying the title company for ongoing issues. Next page. It talks about the contract has changed and is no longer assignable within this section. And it says no assignability. This contract is not assignable by the buyer unless otherwise specified in additional provisions, which is how it used to always be. And this changed because we're kind of getting away from a flip market now, where you could flip these properties and make a profit on it just by assignability, just automatically pretty much. And now you can do it automatically, but you have to put in an additional part of this contract. No big deal. Easy to do if that's what you need to do. These are my notes. Contract was changed so that the default is that the contract is not assignable. If the buyer wants to make the contract assignable, then the broker will need to draft an additional provision within the additional provisions, of course. Next page, 5.2.1, removed the word fixtures. All items listed are included if attached. The list is the same exact for the checkbox items which are under personal property. Didn't bring my glasses, no way I can read that. Okay, and you've all read it a bunch of times. Read it yourself, and it's right out of the contract. Again, it's 2.5.1. Let's go to the next page. It has inclusions and fixtures. Items to be included. Fixtures or personal property not listed in 5.1 or 5.2 inclusions. And what is the difference between a fixture and personal property? I'll read this next part. These are my notes. Fixtures are still listed, and brokers should be able to define the difference between fixtures and personal property. Review of the red line version will help you explain how this section changed. It did change. It's not that deep an issue. And preview of pre-licensed education, fixtures versus personal property. Fixtures are attached with the intent to improve the property, such as lighting, installed hot tubs, built-in stoves or microwaves. Think built-in, attached, installed. Must convey with the property unless excluded in the contract. Personal property is not attached and may or may not be included with the sale. Contract to buy and sell has a built list of percentage or personal property items that must be crossed out if they are not being sold. Personal property will not convey unless it is included in the contract. The difference between personal property and real property, simplest terms, personal property is easily moved. Next page. Any item not to be included in those items are struck out. And it should be listed here. My notes. A broker's job is to bring clarity to the real estate process. Relisting those items that were struck out above makes sure all parties understand the seller's intention is to take them. Next page, old version. Buyers could only terminate if they had a copy of the appraisal. The new version, buyers may now terminate without an appraisal, on or before the appraisal deadline. You don't see an appraisal till closing, guys. Typically, it's very rare you see one beforehand. First of all, the appraisal is the last thing that's ordered, and usually at the closing table, it's just handed to the buyer and it's just slipped in with the rest of the documents, mainly because an appraisal is done on what is called a URAR form, Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, which is a 6-page report. The first 2 pages of which contain 1,200 pieces of information. You heard that right, 1,200 pieces in the first 2 pages. If that appraiser is 99% on that day, there's going to be only 12 mistakes. And how many times are you 99% on? The perfect appraisal has never been done, never will be done. You give it to the people, they don't know how to read it. They couldn't even find out where the value came in at unless you showed it to them. It's put in with the rest of their documents. It goes in their stack of papers that are this thick. And if they want to see it later, it's there. But most people, once they sign their papers, as long as that appraisal came in, they could care less about the rest of it, which is human nature for the most part. So, my notes. Prior to this change, a buyer could not terminate a contract based on appraisal if they did not have a copy of the appraisal. This new provision allows the buyer to terminate if the buyer did not receive appraisal on or before the appraisal deadline. Much, much cleaner. It caused some problems. A lot of deals closed which shouldn't have closed based on this. Let's keep going. Just cleaned it up more than anything. Next page. There are now three deadlines. We have the appraisal deadline, which is the date the buyer must have the appraisal by, the appraisal objection deadline, the date that the buyer must object or terminate by, the appraisal resolution deadline, the date that the parties must reach a resolution or the contract terminates. This is a new deadline. My notes. First 2 deadlines are the same. Third has been added to find solutions when an appraisal is lower than the purchase price. I like that. Much cleaner, much easier to understand within this new contract. And Next page. Brokers not correctly completing contracts. Some applicability of terms, and again, way too small for me to read. Read it on your own. You can do it. And here's some explanations. No blanks may be left in any contract. Brokers should use the appropriate fill-in examples, none or not applicable. There's a rumor going around our industry that you can't use NA anymore for not applicable. Not true. Of course you can. Let me continue with my notes. Note that 3.1 of the contract states that if any blank is left blank, it means the provision is deleted. Brokers are encouraged to make sure blanks in applicable provisions are completed with something other than NA, deleted or left blank. None or not applicable seem to work best. NA works most of the time. Still does, probably always will. But appropriately add none or no other, something along those lines, just for the thought, just for them to understand that you did think it through. Next page. Ongoing issues in 3.1. And again, what should be in this blank? Okay, I'll try it, guys. Any personal property must be conveyed at closing by the seller, free and clear of all taxes except personal properties for the year of closing, liens and encumbrances except, and then conveyance of all personal property will be by bill of sale or other applicable legal instrument, or just the transferring of the personal property itself, of course. My notes. The blanket use of NA is less professional than using the proper term. If there are no liens, none is more appropriate than not applicable. Point is, brokers should not just use NA for all blanks and may not have any space to be filled in blank. Are there some spaces that inevitably should be left blank? I always have a few. Well, not a few. Very rarely, but there might be one or two, just as a freak thing, because later on it talks about it and discounts it anyway. But very rarely. Let's continue here. Who chooses the title company to be used in the transaction? Buyer's broker, listing broker, seller, buyer. This is setting up the decision, the discussion. Okay? Either the seller or the buyer and the parties choosing the standard coverage policy will pay it. The parties can still negotiate who will pay for extended coverage. That's the extension, that's ensuring over the standard exceptions. In every title policy, there are 6 exceptions that cost a little bit extra for them to cover. Typically, whoever orders and pays for the title policy will pay for those, and typically that's the seller. It's up to the seller to prove marketability. Let's continue. Discuss how the public might infer a potential kickback when they learn that the cost of title varies from one company to another. Let's go to the next page. Who pays for the title company to be used in a transaction? The buyer's broker, who chooses? Listing broker chooses, seller chooses, buyer who chooses? My notes. Either the seller or buyer and the parties choosing the contract coverage policy will pay. Whoever orders it, the parties can still negotiate who will pay for extended coverage. Discuss how the public might infer a potential kickback when they learn that the cost of title varies from one company to another. Next one. Brokers may not decide the title company to be used. If asked, it is best to recommend more than one. The rule of 3. You choose 3 of them and give them to choose. Making this choice for the buyer or seller is a potential RESPA violation. You give them the choice. They have no clue who to use, typically. You can explain the 3 of them, tell them what the advantages and disadvantages are, and have them choose. My notes. Ask an audience how many recommended their title company. Then discuss how the public might infer a potential kickback when they learn that the cost of title varies from one company to another. Again, we can never, ever get a kickback from a title company. RESPA is the Consumer Disclosure and Anti-Kickback Act. There's 2 purposes of RESPA. Real Estate Settlement and Procedures Act. They regulate how closings, settlements are to be handled, and also regulate kickbacks. The idea here is to prevent the payment of kickbacks and other fees, which drive up the cost of the product to consumers. Section 8A of RESPA prohibits any person from giving or receiving a thing of value for the referral of settlement services in connection with federally related mortgage loans. Thus, lenders may not pay and real estate agents may not receive fees for the referral of settlement service business. Cut and dried, easy to understand. Ongoing issues. Again, contract to buy and sell allows for either the seller or buyer to pick and pay the cost of title insurance. Key point. These are my notes. If one of the checks boxes is chosen, then that person selects and pays for the title company. Whoever checks that box pays for it. Not that tough. Next page. Why isn't there an option for seller selects and buyer pays, or buyer selects and seller pays? RESPA prohibits the seller from selecting the title company and having the buyer pay. Buyers may sue the seller who violates this provision for an amount equal to 3 times all charges made for title insurance. And it is not a violation of RESPA for the buyer to select and have the seller pay. How about that? A lot of people don't understand that. Let's keep going here. These are my notes here. Section 9 of RESPA prohibits a seller from requiring the home buyer to use a particular title insurance company, either directly or indirectly, as a condition of sale. Buyers may sue a seller who violates this provision for an amount equal to 3 times all charges made for the title insurance. Next page. How could a broker create the option in the CBS contract to buy and sell for having the buyer select and seller pay? Option 1, account for all costs in section 4.2 seller concessions. Excellent idea. Next page. Draft provisions in section 30 and additional provisions, and spell it out there. Next page. Brokers not understanding off-record titles issues. Which of the following is included in the off-record title section? Unrecorded easements, leases, special assessments, first rights of refusal, third-party water rights, potential adverse possession, surveys and seller's possession. Let's go down this list, okay? We have unrecorded easements. Yes, that is part of the, again, the exceptions that are not included in the typical title policy. The title policy charges extra for this, anywhere from about $40 to $100. Leases, no, nothing about under due diligence. Special assessments, yes. First rights of refusal, if there are any, yes. Third-party water rights, yes. Adverse possession, yes, if known. Remember, are there any squatters on the property? You probably haven't run into this since pre-licensing. The squatters' rights in Colorado is 18 years now, and it'll vary. They change it from time to time. Every state is different. And surveys that are in seller's possession. Yes, if there are any surveys in seller's possession, they have to be brought to the table. Now, next page, brokers not understanding off-record title issues. Off-record title covers all items the seller has knowledge of, which might impact the buyer, but which are not recorded and in public records. Recorded easements would be shown in the title work. Unrecorded easements, first rights of refusal, or options require disclosures by the seller per this section. Next page. Brokers not making sure leases are assigned. Assignment of leases. If a seller is selling a property subject to an existing lease or leases, the leases must be assigned to the buyer at closing. Failure by the seller to assign the leases can cause the leases it should be unenforceable after the closing. This requirement impacts any property having a lease or leases regardless of the property type. My notes. Assignment of leases of any type of investment property should take place at closing. General practice issues, our next section here, over to the next page here, 64. Entry only or limited services listing. This is a big part of our industry right now. You'll see why in a minute. There's no such thing as an entry only or limited services listing. Any broker performing activities that require a real estate broker's license must, number one, act in the capacity of either a transaction broker or a single party or a single agent to a transaction. Fully perform the uniform duties as outlined in the contract and statute for these roles. My notes. It says, since most limited listings, service listings, limit the required representation and uniform duties required by law, they are in violation of Colorado statutes. We see these people. I'll throw your home in the MLS for $1,000. They throw in the MLS and forget about it, go to closing, collect their fees. The buyer's broker does all the work. You can't do that. Can't do that. Remember we put that 1.75% earlier that we went over? Let's go to page 65. Brokers can perform duties in addition to the required uniform duties, such as holding open houses, use of multiple listing services, or other information exchanges, providing lockboxes, etc. A broker is not allowed to solely perform additional duties. Offering the real estate of another for sale through advertisement without providing required uniform duties. Doing so may violate Colorado revised statutes regarding required minimum duties of agents or transaction brokers. My notes. A broker may limit duties to the seller outside of the uniform duties. Not hold an open house, something like that. But, there's an example. Next page. The following should be reported to the Real Estate Commission if you see the words entry only, communication only with seller, or words to that effect in the multiple listing service or other information exchanges. This could signal a violation of the Colorado revised statute. Again, entry only or communication only with seller, etc. Make sure you get that correctly identified, correctly interpreted. Next one, the facts. A real estate broker was conducting business and advertising in the MLS as an entry service. Broker listed a property in MLS as limited service for 6 months and then extended the listing for 1 year. MLS listing stated, call listing agent when submitting offers, and listed property as for sale by owner. If broker was contacted by a buyer, he or she would explain the property was for sale by owner and referred buyer to the seller. Next page. Broker stated he or she was paid a flat fee for advertising in the MLS and was not paid a commission, and so was not acting as a transaction broker. He or she is not a full service agent. It is that practice to not attend closings. It is their practice not to attend closings. As an independent broker, he or she has no one to attend closings in his or her place. He or she reviews and signs documents the day before closing, then signs the settlement statement and reviews it with the seller. Broker was using an attorney drafted form as his or her exclusive agency contract. Broker believed contract allowed limited services. However, the broker signed the contract as a transaction broker in contract clearly stated limited services provided and defined agency relationships. Now, what did the broker do wrong? These are my notes. On 12-61113, the violations of commission rules. Same section, unworthy, incompetent practice. Another section, 12-61-808, disclosure of agent duties and responsibilities. 12-61-804, single agent engaged by the seller or landlord. These are all things that go against these statutes. Rule E5, closing responsibilities. Those are all part of the state statute. That's not necessarily a part of the contract. Let's keep going. Next page, 69. The outcome. Broker was censured and given formal discipline, fined $2,500. Broker had to complete the following courses within 1 year. Broker administration course, brokerage relationships course, and contracts. And broker additionally changed business mode. Broker now uses CTME contracts. Good advertisement for CTME, that's just a business out there. Requires sellers to sign the Real Estate Commission approved exclusive right to sell listing contract. These are my notes again. Prepares all seller documents. Stays involved with all parties, seller, agent for buyer, title company, and lender if needed until the property is closed. Added language in the listing agreement stating the seller agrees that all offers will be reviewed by her before accepted by the seller, and added stronger language in the MLS broker remarks making it clear that agents are to contact her for submitting offers. The next part talks about referral fees. Page 71. There are a number of federal and state regulations with regards to referral fees. To simplify this topic, this section will address two primary points: Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA, and Rule E23. RESPA, page 72. In short, RESPA states that a real estate broker shall not give any incentive, inducement, disincentive, remuneration, commission, fee, or other thing of value to or from a settlement service provider for the referral of business in a real estate transaction involving a federally related mortgage loan. Next page, Rule E23, payment to out-of-state brokers. A licensed Colorado broker who cooperates with a broker who is licensed in another state but is not licensed in Colorado may pay such out-of-state broker a finder's fee or a referral fee or share of the commission under these circumstances. A, the broker licensed in the other state or country must reside and maintain an office in the other state or country. This rule shall also apply to the payment made to citizens or residents of a country which does not license real estate brokers, if the payee represents that they are in the business of selling real estate in said country. Now, I was down in Tucson a few years back. I went to some new home subdivisions just for the heck of it, look some homes. And there's one broker in there. I told him I was from Denver, and he said, "Would you want to sell a buddy of mine a house? He's moving there." I said, "Sure." He said, "Would you pay me a referral fee?" I asked him, "Are you licensed?" And he was licensed in Arizona, and he had a place of business, that new home subdivision. So of course I was allowed to pay him a referral fee. Next page, 74. Payment to out-of-state brokers again. All advertising, negotiations, contracting, and conveyancing done in Colorado must be performed in the name of the licensed Colorado broker. All money collected from the parties to the transaction prior to closing shall be deposited in the name of the licensed Colorado broker according to the commission rules. And my notes again, all forms of real estate sales, including commercial, fall under this requirement. No big mystery. A key point of Rule E23 is that an out-of-state broker may be paid a referral fee by the Colorado broker, but may not be paid directly from the closing as a shared commission. In plain terms, an out-of-state broker not licensed in Colorado may not co-list a property in the state of Colorado. RESPA applies only to residential, but E23 applies to all forms of real estate, commercial, etc. Again, RESPA only applies to residential properties, 1 to 4 units. 1 to 4 units that are actually going to be sold to the secondary market, to be more accurate. Let's continue here. General practice issues again. Contract to buy and sell, new and ongoing issues. Entry only, limited services listings. Again, talking about all these, talking about rebates again. Page 77, payment to the unlicensed purchaser is often referred to as rebating. Payments to the unlicensed purchaser. The intention to pay money to the purchaser is sometimes advertised and promoted as a sales inducement. Payment to a purchaser in itself is not a violation of the license law. Then my least favorite word, however, just cancel that out. A broker representing the seller should take care to ensure that such payments do not conflict with fiduciary duties. Continuing. Listing broker agrees to rebate 1% of the commission on sale of client's current residence upon the sale and closing of the client's replacement home. At closing of replacement home, the agent gives a check to the client from the brokerage for the 1%. Was this handled correctly? Next page. Was this rebate handled correctly? The answer is no. Because the rebate does not appear on the closing statement, and the lender is not aware of the rebate. The better way to handle this situation is to give the rebate to the seller as a discount to the commission paid so that the rebated amount appears on the closing statement. Just remember, it is not loan fraud if it is disclosed to all parties. This gets dicey, guys. The thing is, when you're, can I give something back to my seller? Yes, I can. All you're doing is discounting your fee, but it has to be in the closing statement. That's the kicker. Has to be in the closing state, and the lender has to be informed. Now, how about rebating to the buyer? They make a little issue out of that in here. There's more to it than that. I was working with the Rules Committee for the licensing of mortgage brokers a few years back, and we got into a very heavy discussion about this. I made the